your pizza?
Leave it on the doorstep and get the hell out.
Well, what about the money?
What money? Matter of fact, how much do I owe you? Hey, I'm gonna give you to the captain.
It'll be 1180, sir.
Another 10. You get your ugly, yellow, no good keister off my... Keep the change, you filthy animal. 10. Property. Before I pump your guts full of lead. 1, 2...
Well, you have to pay for your pizza, sir.
A lovely cheese pizza, just for me.
Out of here.
There is something strange about Home Alone that becomes clearer the older you get. As children, we watch it and see freedom. We see a kid who wakes up to discover that every adult has vanished, and for a few glorious minutes, the world belongs entirely to him. No parents telling him what to eat. No siblings bothering him. No bedtime. No rules. No one asking where he is. The house becomes a kingdom, the refrigerator becomes his personal pantry, the television becomes his private cinema, and Christmas suddenly feels like the ultimate reward for being left alone. But strip away the Christmas music, the bright decorations, the exaggerated screams, and the flying paint cans, and the premise becomes almost horrifying. A child has been accidentally abandoned inside a huge suburban house while his entire family has flown across the Atlantic. He does not know when they are coming back. He has no adult watching over him. And outside that house are two criminals who have already decided that the property is their next target. That is not the setup for a harmless children's fantasy. It is the setup for a survival story. The genius of Home Alone is that it never asks us to choose between those two interpretations. It lets the fantasy and the fear exist at exactly the same time. Kevin McAllister genuinely enjoys being alone. He also genuinely becomes terrified by it. At first, independence feels like freedom. Then freedom starts to feel like responsibility. The same house that once seemed enormous and exciting suddenly has dark corners, unfamiliar noises, and windows that need to be watched. Every creaking floorboard becomes a question. Every shadow might contain a threat. And that is why the wet bandits matter more than their ridiculous injuries might suggest. Harry and Marv are cartoon criminals, but the danger they represent is real within Kevin's world. They are adults entering a child's supposedly safe space. They have experience, physical strength, and malicious intent. Kevin has imagination. That imbalance is what makes the comedy work. We laugh because Kevin turns the house into a playground, but underneath every joke is the knowledge that he has to do something because nobody else is coming. And this is where Home Alone becomes much more interesting than its reputation as a Christmas comedy suggests. Kevin is not simply defending a house. He is confronting the terrifying possibility that the people he depends on might not be available when he needs them. His journey is about discovering what independence actually costs. It is about realizing that getting what you want is not always the same as getting what you need. And somewhere in the middle of all those traps is Old Man Marley, a character who seems to belong to a completely different movie until we realize that he may be the emotional key to the entire story. Marley is what Kevin could become if isolation stopped being temporary. Kevin has been given a taste of life without his family. Marley has lived with separation long enough for it to become a wound. Between them, the movie quietly asks a question that the slapstick keeps distracting us from answering. What happens when being alone stops feeling like freedom? The answer is the reason Home Alone still feels magical. The McAllister house is not merely a location. It becomes an extension of Kevin's imagination, fear, memory, and growing confidence. Every staircase, window, door, ornament, and hallway becomes something he can reinterpret. A place designed by adults becomes a world controlled by a child. The movie's central joke is therefore also its central emotional idea. Kevin becomes powerful precisely because he is forced to become responsible. And because the film never completely forgets how frightening that responsibility is, the comedy has genuine stakes. We laugh at Kevin's victory, but we also understand why he wants to hear his mother's voice again. We celebrate the traps, but we remember that the boy building them is still a child. We cheer when he wins, but the emotional victory is not that Kevin can survive without his family. It is that he finally understands why he does not want to. Before we get there, though, it is worth understanding why the movie's construction is so unusually effective. Home Alone looks simple because its premise can be explained in one sentence. A boy is accidentally left home alone during Christmas and has to defend his house from burglars. But simplicity is not the same thing as simplicity of construction. Beneath that sentence is an extraordinarily precise combination of screenplay structure, performance, production design, physical comedy, music, pacing, and emotional timing. John Hughes understood how to write children as emotionally complicated people without making them sound like miniature adults. Chris Columbus understood how to direct a family film that could move from broad comedy to genuine sentiment without destroying the tone. Macaulay Culkin possessed the rare screen presence necessary to carry huge stretches of the film almost entirely by himself. Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern created a comic partnership in which Harry and Marv feel distinct even when they are being repeatedly punished by the same house. And then there is the house itself. It is one of the most important supporting characters in the film. It has the size and visual richness of a child's dream, but it also contains exactly the kinds of architectural features that can become terrifying when you are the only person inside it. The filmmakers understood that Kevin's battle needed to feel visually coherent. The traps may become increasingly ridiculous, but the audience always knows where Kevin is, where the burglars are, what the danger is, and why the next piece of chaos is about to happen. That clarity is essential to physical comedy. Without it, pain becomes noise. With it, every impact becomes a miniature story. The film's production design also allows Christmas to function as more than decoration. Warm lights, red and green colors, wreaths, ornaments, trees, candles, snow, and glowing windows create a world that feels safe and nostalgic even when the plot is turning violent. John Williams' music deepens that contradiction. His score can make Kevin walking through his own kitchen feel like an adventure, then turn a quiet moment of longing into something almost sacred. That emotional generosity is one of the film's greatest secrets. Home Alone never behaves as though its story is too silly to deserve serious filmmaking. Instead, it treats the fantasy seriously enough for us to believe in it. That is why the movie can survive decades of criticism about its physics and still work emotionally. We are not watching a documentary about home security. We are watching childhood imagination rendered with blockbuster craftsmanship. And perhaps that is why so many people remember the movie less as a collection of jokes than as a feeling. The feeling of Christmas approaching. The feeling of a house filled with decorations. The feeling of adults rushing around while children are pushed to the margins of the chaos. The feeling that family arguments are enormous when you are young because the people involved are your entire universe. Kevin's frustration is exaggerated, but the emotional source of it is recognizable. He wants to be heard. He wants someone to take him seriously. He wants control over a world in which older siblings can embarrass him, adults can dismiss him, and decisions seem to be made without him. For a child, being misunderstood can feel almost identical to being unloved. Kevin's mistake is that he responds to that feeling with the most extreme possible wish. He wants everyone gone. And when they actually disappear, he discovers the difference between wanting space and wanting abandonment. That distinction is at the heart of the movie's nostalgia. Many adults who revisit Home Alone are not simply remembering Macaulay Culkin screaming in front of the bathroom mirror. They are remembering an imagined version of childhood where the house was a territory, where a refrigerator could feel enormous, where staying awake until midnight felt rebellious, where Christmas decorations could transform ordinary rooms into magical spaces, and where being allowed to make your own decisions felt like becoming an adult overnight. Kevin's bedroom, the hallways, the kitchen, the stairs, even the basement become childhood territory. The house is huge because childhood makes familiar spaces feel huge. The basement furnace seems monstrous because children's fears are not measured by adult logic. And when Kevin begins preparing his traps, he is doing something children have always done, transforming fear into play. The difference is that his game has real consequences. That is why the movie remains so deeply connected to Christmas viewing traditions. Every generation can enter it through a different door. Children see freedom. Teenagers see rebellion. Parents see the nightmare of losing a child. Adults who grew up with it see nostalgia. And viewers who know the film almost by heart can still discover small details because the movie's world is so densely constructed. Its staying power comes from the fact that Home Alone does not merely remind us of Christmas. It reminds us of what Christmas felt like when we were young enough to believe that the world was simultaneously enormous and completely ours. The story begins in the most appropriate possible environment for this kind of chaos, a house that already feels too full. Before Kevin is ever alone, he is surrounded by people. Siblings, cousins, parents, relatives, luggage, food, decorations, noise. The opening does not need to explain every relationship because the visual chaos communicates the emotional reality. Kevin is one child inside an overwhelming family system. He is not necessarily unloved, but he is frequently unheard. That distinction matters. The movie does not present the McAllisters as monsters who deliberately mistreat their youngest child. They are simply a family caught inside the ordinary madness of preparing for a major trip. And in that environment, Buzz has a special kind of power. He is older, louder, more confident, and perfectly comfortable occupying space that Kevin wants for himself. When the conflict over the pizza escalates, the argument becomes much bigger than food. It becomes a collision between a child who feels powerless and a family that has become too distracted to notice how powerless he feels. Kevin's anger is sincere even when his behavior is immature. He does not know how to express the deeper problem, so he expresses the surface problem at maximum volume. He wants his family to disappear. He wants the chaos to stop. He wants the adults to stop telling him what to do. He wants, for once, to matter. The irony is that his wish is granted in the worst possible way. The family goes to bed believing Kevin is upstairs, while Kevin is sent into another space after the argument. The details of the household's frantic preparation are crucial because the eventual abandonment feels like the product of human error rather than supernatural punishment. Suitcases are packed. Tickets are organized. Children are counted. Doors are opened. Cars arrive. The family rushes toward the airport. A power problem and the confusion of the morning contribute to the counting mistake. And then the cars disappear. The house becomes quiet. Kevin wakes up expecting the ordinary noise of his family and instead encounters silence. At first, he assumes they are simply hiding. Then he explores. Room by room, the evidence accumulates. No voices. No footsteps. No siblings. No parents. The realization does not arrive all at once. It arrives through absence. And that is what makes the scene work. Kevin does not immediately understand the enormity of what has happened. He is a child trying to solve an impossible change in his environment. When he finally realizes that everyone is gone, fear briefly takes control. Then something unexpected happens. The fear gives way to wonder. Kevin understands that nobody is going to stop him. The empty house becomes a laboratory for independence. Kevin tests the boundaries of his new freedom almost immediately. He eats whatever he wants. He explores rooms that normally belong to adults or older family members. He watches a movie he is not supposed to watch. He jumps on beds. He stays up late. He experiences the intoxicating sensation of having no one to answer to. The sequence is funny because it captures a fantasy almost every child can understand. If adults disappeared for a day, what would you do first? Kevin's answer is not deep. He indulges himself. That is exactly what makes it believable. He is not suddenly transformed into a miniature adult. He is still a kid. But underneath the fun, something more important is happening. Kevin is learning that freedom comes with maintenance. Someone has to buy food. Someone has to close doors. Someone has to answer the phone. Someone has to decide what to do when something goes wrong. The movie gradually shifts from fantasy to responsibility without announcing the change. Kevin moves from consuming freedom to managing it. He goes shopping. He thinks about the house. He notices strange activity around the neighborhood. He begins to understand that being alone means he has to interpret the world for himself. That becomes especially important when Harry and Marv enter the picture. Harry is disguised as a police officer, which gives the sequence a quiet irony. Kevin trusts the appearance of adult authority long enough for the audience to understand how vulnerable he is. But he also notices inconsistencies. The supposed policeman is actually studying the house. Kevin is not simply clever because the script tells us he is clever. He is clever because he observes. He listens. He notices behavior. He starts understanding that adults can lie. This is a significant development because Kevin's earlier problem was feeling powerless inside a family system. Now he is outside that system, and the world is more dangerous than he expected. The burglars do not care that he is a child. They see a house with nobody home. Kevin sees the same house and realizes that someone has to protect it. The transformation happens gradually. He could hide. He could wait. He could hope the police come back. Instead, he decides to defend himself. That decision is the true call to adventure. The traps are merely the expression of it. Kevin is choosing agency. Once Kevin decides to defend the house, the film turns architecture into strategy. He studies where the burglars might enter. He considers the layout. He identifies surfaces that can be manipulated. The tools available to him are not military weapons or advanced technology. They are household objects. Toys. Decorations. paint, ice, rope, tar, ornaments, a furnace, a blowtorch, a spider. Things adults would see as ordinary become, in Kevin's hands, instruments of defense. This is where the film's child-centered logic becomes especially clever. Kevin does not defeat the burglars because he suddenly becomes physically stronger. He defeats them by seeing the environment differently. Adults see a staircase. Kevin sees a trap. Adults see Christmas ornaments. Kevin sees a minefield. Adults see a door. Kevin sees a target. That transformation is essentially what imagination does. It takes an ordinary world and gives it new rules. The traps also represent agency. Kevin cannot control whether his parents return. He cannot control the burglar's intentions. He cannot control the fact that he was forgotten. But he can control where he places a toy, when he pulls a rope, or which door he leaves unlocked. The more elaborate the traps become, the more the house starts to feel like Kevin's mind externalized. It is a map of his problem-solving process. He is frightened, so he prepares. He is uncertain, so he observes. He is physically smaller, so he makes the environment work for him. That is why the burglars become increasingly frustrated. They enter expecting a helpless child and instead find a space that seems to be fighting back. Their adult experience becomes useless because they keep approaching the house according to adult assumptions. They expect predictable behavior. They expect a child to hide. They expect fear to produce surrender. Kevin does the opposite. He uses their expectations against them. Even the most ridiculous traps are structured around this idea. The burglars think they are invading Kevin's world. In reality, they are entering a world whose rules Kevin has rewritten. The difference between Kevin and the wet bandits is therefore not simply intelligence. It is adaptability. Kevin learns from every failed attempt. Harry and Marv keep repeating the same basic mistake. They underestimate him. Their frustration becomes funnier because it is also a form of dramatic justice. They have experience with crime, but Kevin has experience with being a child. He knows where people assume children will be, what they will be afraid of, and how adults behave when they think they are in control. That knowledge becomes his weapon. But the movie cannot allow Kevin's confidence to continue without interruption. If the traps worked perfectly, Home Alone would become repetitive. More importantly, Kevin would never need to grow emotionally. The midpoint of the story therefore introduces a different kind of danger, the danger of loneliness itself. Old Man Marley initially appears through neighborhood mythology. To Kevin, he is frightening because other people have described him as frightening. The rumor is more powerful than the man. His appearance, his isolation, and the stories surrounding him turn him into a childhood monster. Yet when Kevin encounters the reality of Marley, the mythology begins to dissolve. Marley is not a monster. He is a lonely old man who has become separated from his family. The emotional revelation is quiet compared with the traps, but it changes the meaning of everything around it. Kevin has been complaining about his family while Marley is suffering because he has lost his connection with his own. Kevin is temporarily alone. Marley is emotionally alone. Kevin believes solitude is freedom. Marley demonstrates what happens when isolation becomes permanent. The parallel is one of the film's most important pieces of writing because it gives Kevin's journey a human consequence beyond the immediate burglary plot. Marley is not simply a kindly old man inserted to save Kevin later. He is a warning. He represents the possibility that being separated from people can become a way of life. His estrangement from his son and granddaughter gives Kevin a glimpse of adulthood stripped of the noise he currently resents. There is no buzz to annoy him. No parents to embarrass him. No siblings to overwhelm him. But there is also no family to come home to. That realization begins changing Kevin before he consciously understands it. He becomes more empathetic. He listens. He recognizes pain in another person because he has experienced a smaller version of it himself. And then the burglars return, forcing the emotional lesson back into physical danger. Kevin's earlier confidence begins to crack because Harry and Marv are adapting. They discover weaknesses. They stop being merely obstacles and become genuine threats. The house, which had felt completely controlled, suddenly feels penetrable. Kevin's traps are still clever, but cleverness cannot make him invulnerable. That distinction is crucial. The movie allows Kevin to become powerful without pretending he has stopped being afraid. In fact, the fear becomes more visible precisely because the stakes are rising. What began as a game is turning into survival. The final battle works because the house eventually stops being enough. Harry and Marv push deeper into Kevin's territory, and the boys' carefully constructed system begins to collapse. Kevin has to move. He has to improvise. He has to use spaces outside the house. The treehouse, the exterior of the property, the neighboring structures, and finally the abandoned house become extensions of the battlefield. This expansion changes the visual language of the climax. Earlier, Kevin was the master of a controlled environment. Now he is improvising inside an unpredictable world. The traps become more extreme, but Kevin's emotional state becomes more vulnerable. He is genuinely terrified. That fear is important because the audience needs to feel that the final confrontation is not simply another round of slapstick. When Harry and Marv finally capture Kevin, the fantasy briefly collapses. The boy who seemed invincible is suddenly powerless again. The threat becomes real. And that is precisely when the story pays off the relationship it built quietly with Marley. The old man arrives with the shovel, and the moment works because it is not simply an action rescue. It is the fulfillment of the emotional parallel. Kevin once feared Marley because he thought he represented danger. Instead, Marley becomes the person who protects him. The adult he misjudged becomes the adult who does what Kevin's missing family cannot do at that moment. The police arrive, Harry and Marv are taken away, and the house is left in ruins. Yet the most important image is not the destruction. It is the quiet afterward. Kevin has won, but the victory does not feel complete. He walks through the house and sees the aftermath of the adventure. The place that once represented freedom now feels empty. He wants his family back. Christmas morning arrives, and the emotional meaning of the movie finally becomes visible. Kevin is not celebrating because he proved he could live without his family. He is celebrating because he learned that he did not want to. Kate returns home, and the reunion is deliberately simple. There is no elaborate speech explaining Kevin's transformation. The emotion is carried by the embrace. The family gradually returns. Buzz discovers what happened to his room and reacts with exactly the kind of outrage that reminds us why Kevin wanted everyone gone in the first place. The cycle is restored, but Kevin is not exactly the same child who went to bed before the trip. He has learned something the rest of the family may not fully understand. He knows what their absence feels like. Kevin's character becomes more interesting when we stop treating his cleverness as his defining trait. His surface goal is freedom, but his internal need is recognition. He wants to feel that he matters. Inside a huge family, attention is a limited resource, and Kevin believes he is constantly losing the competition for it. Buzz is therefore more than an annoying older brother. He represents the family hierarchy Kevin cannot control. Buzz can embarrass him, invade his space, make decisions with confidence, and often escape the consequences because he is older. Kevin's desire to control the house after everyone leaves is a reaction to that powerlessness. Suddenly there is nobody older than him. Nobody can overrule him. Nobody can tell him what to do. For a while, that feels perfect. But independence exposes a contradiction. Control over an environment does not eliminate emotional dependence. Kevin can control the lights, the doors, the food, and the traps. He cannot control whether his mother misses him. He cannot manufacture the feeling of being loved. That is why his traps are such a powerful symbol of his development. They give him agency, but they do not give him connection. The more competent Kevin becomes, the more the movie quietly reminds us that competence is not the same as adulthood. He can solve practical problems while still needing emotional reassurance. His encounter with Marley accelerates this maturity because empathy requires him to look beyond himself. Before Marley, Kevin sees people mainly in terms of what they do to him. Buzz annoys him. His parents discipline him. The burglars threaten him. Marley scares him. After hearing Marley's story, Kevin begins to see what other people might be feeling. That is a major step toward maturity. He starts understanding that families are not simply collections of people who inconvenience you. They are relationships that can be damaged by anger, distance, and silence. The final reunion therefore matters more than any individual trap. Kevin's greatest victory is not that he survives Harry and Marv. It is that he changes his understanding of what being alone means. Harry and Marv work because the movie gives their stupidity structure. Harry is the leader, the planner, and the person most convinced that he understands the situation. Marv is more chaotic, more easily distracted, and often fascinated by details that have nothing to do with the larger objective. Their nickname, the Wet Bandits, already suggests that they are not presented as terrifying masterminds. They are criminals whose competence is constantly undermined by personality. Harry's arrogance makes him underestimate Kevin. Marv's foolishness makes him easy to manipulate. Together, they are almost perfect enemies for a child because they possess exactly the kind of adult authority Kevin needs to overcome. They are physically stronger and more experienced, but they are not emotionally prepared for a child who refuses to behave according to their expectations. Their greed gives them a goal. Their confidence gives them momentum. Their incompetence gives Kevin an opening. And the film uses physical comedy as characterization. When Marv reacts to pain, we learn something about his temperament. When Harry becomes increasingly furious, we see his obsession with maintaining control. Their injuries are exaggerated, but the reactions make them feel like characters rather than interchangeable villains. The audience enjoys seeing them lose because the movie establishes the moral simplicity of the conflict. We are not being asked to debate their motivations. They are breaking into houses. Kevin is protecting himself. The comedy can therefore become almost ritualistic. Every time Harry and Marv believe they have regained control, Kevin reminds them that they are still inside his world. Their adult experience becomes a liability because it creates overconfidence. Kevin's lack of experience forces him to remain flexible. In that sense, the burglars function as external pressure on Kevin's growth. They turn an emotional problem into a physical one. If Kevin had simply been left alone, he might have enjoyed his freedom and eventually learned to miss his family. But because the burglars arrive, he must develop practical courage immediately. They force him to discover what he can do under pressure. The supporting characters create the emotional ecosystem that makes Kevin's isolation believable. Kate McAllister is particularly important because her journey mirrors Kevin's from the opposite direction. Kevin begins by wanting distance from his mother. Kate begins the film surrounded by the practical responsibilities of managing a huge family, and only after Kevin disappears does she understand the emotional cost of that responsibility. Her panic is not simply a plot device to get her back home. It is the adult version of the same fear Kevin experiences. She realizes that a child she loves is somewhere without her. Suddenly, every ordinary family irritation becomes irrelevant. The missing child is all that matters. Peter is less emotionally visible, but his presence helps establish the family as a functioning, if chaotic, unit rather than a collection of villains and heroes. Buzz is Kevin's primary family antagonist, but even he is not truly evil. He is an older brother behaving like an older brother, which is precisely why Kevin's resentment feels authentic. The siblings create noise and conflict more than deliberate cruelty. Frank, meanwhile, represents the comic selfishness that makes the family's wealth and dysfunction more amusing. Fuller becomes a recurring joke whose significance is less about character development than the rhythm of family life. Everyone contributes to the sense that Kevin lives inside a crowd. That crowd is why his loneliness feels so extreme once it disappears. The police and airline personnel represent another dimension of the adult world. They are not necessarily malicious. They are simply part of systems that Kevin cannot easily navigate. To a child, bureaucracy can feel almost as intimidating as danger. You can explain your problem and still not be believed. You can ask for help and still be misunderstood. This is one reason Kevin becomes so dependent on his own ingenuity. The supporting cast reflects the world as Kevin perceives it: crowded, noisy, dismissive, occasionally loving, and often impossible to control. Old Man Marley stands apart from that noise. He is quiet where the McAllisters are loud. He is isolated where they are crowded. He gives the story emotional balance. Through him, the movie can move from comedy into compassion without abandoning its child-centered perspective. At its core, Home Alone is about independence versus isolation. Kevin initially believes they are the same thing. If he is independent, nobody can annoy him. If nobody can annoy him, he will be happy. The film dismantles that equation by giving him independence in its most extreme form. He has everything he thought he wanted, and then discovers that the freedom means very little when he has nobody to share it with. This is why the movie's emotional arc works despite its absurd premise. The audience does not need to believe that every detail could happen. We only need to believe the emotional transformation. Kevin begins with anger and ends with appreciation. He begins by wanting his family to disappear and ends by wanting them home. The burglars provide fear, but fear becomes a pathway to maturity. Kevin learns responsibility because nobody else is there to take it for him. He learns forgiveness because anger does not protect him from loneliness. He learns that wanting space from family is different from wanting life without family. That distinction is universal. Most families experience moments when people want to escape one another. Children imagine running away. Parents imagine quiet. Siblings imagine separate houses. But the desire for distance usually exists inside the larger desire for connection. Home Alone understands that contradiction without over-explaining it. Kevin's emotional outburst has consequences, but the movie does not punish him morally for having complicated feelings. Instead, it lets him experience those feelings to their logical extreme. He gets exactly what he asks for. And because he gets it, he learns why he asked for the wrong thing. The visual language reinforces this theme constantly. The McAllister house is warm, expansive, and beautifully decorated, but it also becomes threatening once Kevin is alone. Christmas lights create pools of warmth against darkness. Red and green colors make the environment feel festive, but the same colors can become visually intense during moments of danger. Windows allow Kevin to observe the outside world, but they also remind him that he can be observed. Doors become boundaries between safety and threat. Stairs are pathways that can suddenly become obstacles. The basement furnace takes a simple household object and transforms it into something almost monstrous because childhood fear often gives ordinary machines supernatural power. The Christmas tree is a symbol of celebration, but the decorations surrounding it become part of Kevin's defensive arsenal. That transformation is one of the movie's most elegant visual ideas. The objects associated with family and Christmas are repurposed by Kevin to protect himself. The spider, too, becomes both fear and weapon. Kevin does not stop being afraid of these things. He simply learns to use fear strategically. The church provides a different kind of space. It is quieter, more open, and emotionally restrained. After so much visual clutter, the church gives Kevin and Marley room to speak honestly. The snow-covered neighborhood similarly creates a strange mixture of beauty and isolation. Everything looks magical, but Kevin is still alone. The contrast between warm interiors and cold exteriors reflects his emotional movement. Home feels safe when family is present. Without family, the same home becomes a fortress. That is the central visual contradiction. Safety is not created by architecture alone. It is created by people. The film also becomes more interesting when viewed through Kevin's relationship with adult systems. Children live inside structures they rarely control. Parents make schedules. Schools make rules. Police represent authority. Airports represent complicated systems of travel. Stores represent money and transactions. Kevin is surrounded by adult mechanisms designed to keep life functioning, but from his perspective those systems often make him feel invisible. The police sequence captures this perfectly. Kevin tries to navigate authority and discovers that simply telling the truth does not guarantee that adults will understand it. His response is to become more self-reliant. Even the fake gangster movie becomes a tool for manipulating adult assumptions. Angels with Filthy Souls is fictional within Home Alone, but Kevin treats it as a source of power. He uses media to create the illusion that someone dangerous is present. The movie within the movie is funny because it shows a child borrowing adult imagery to control adults. Kevin cannot physically overpower the burglars, so he weaponizes their imagination. He understands that fear does not always require actual force. Sometimes all it requires is convincing someone that force exists. The house therefore becomes a miniature society. Kevin manages resources, controls boundaries, creates security systems, and establishes rules. The wealth of the McAllister family makes this fantasy possible. Kevin has access to food, electricity, a large property, a telephone, a stocked home, and enough space to improvise. The movie's suburban fantasy is inseparable from that material abundance. Yet the story ultimately argues that consumer wealth cannot replace emotional connection. The house can contain almost everything Kevin needs except the people he loves. Christmas itself carries the same contradiction. It is commercial, decorative, excessive, and material, but it is also rooted in tradition, memory, and togetherness. Home Alone uses both sides. The movie loves Christmas spectacle while insisting that the emotional meaning of Christmas is not the spectacle. It is the return home. Because Home Alone is live action, its visual effects are less about digital illusion than about physical engineering. The film's famous injuries were created through practical effects, stunt work, choreography, props, camera placement, and editing. The result is a form of comedy that depends on visual clarity. When a paint can swings towards someone's face, we understand the setup, the motion, the impact, and the reaction. The sequence is funny partly because we can see the cause and effect. The same applies to the stairs, the ice, the blowtorch, the heated doorknob, the ornaments, the nail, and the countless objects Kevin turns into hazards. The filmmakers understood that physical comedy requires preparation. A gag needs anticipation. The audience must know what the character does not know, or know what is about to happen just before it happens. That creates suspense, and suspense makes the impact funnier. Wide shots are particularly important because they let us understand spatial relationships. If the camera constantly hid the action through close-ups, the traps would feel arbitrary. Instead, the film often gives the audience enough visual information to participate in the joke. We become complicit. We know the paint can is coming. We know the floor is icy. We know the ornament is waiting. We watch Harry or Marv walk toward the danger while feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread. The exaggerated physics are obviously impossible, but they are consistent enough within the film's comic universe. The injuries become symbolic rather than realistic. They represent the punishment of arrogance. The more confidently the burglars enter Kevin's world, the more violently that world rejects them. Fire, falling objects, slippery surfaces, and blunt impacts become a language. The house speaks through them. Chris Columbus' direction is crucial because the movie could easily have collapsed under the weight of its own extremes. On one side is a broad children's adventure in which a boy battles criminals using household objects. On the other is a sentimental Christmas story about a child who misses his family and an old man separated from his own. Columbus allows both movies to exist. He frames Kevin as physically small but narratively powerful. The house often dwarfs him, but once he begins preparing it, the camera makes the environment feel like something he can command. During chaotic sequences, movement and cutting create energy. During emotional scenes, the film slows down. The church sequence is a good example of this restraint. There is no need for elaborate comedy. The visual language becomes quieter because the characters are finally saying things that matter. Columbus also understands reaction shots. Kevin's face is essential because Macaulay Culkin can communicate a surprising amount without dialogue. His expressions let the audience move between confidence, fear, surprise, frustration, and wonder almost instantly. This is particularly important because the movie asks viewers to remain emotionally attached to a child who is also capable of designing extremely dangerous traps. If Kevin seemed cruel, the comedy would become uncomfortable. Instead, his fear and innocence keep him sympathetic. Columbus also avoids excessive cynicism. The film does not mock Kevin for wanting his family back. It does not treat family affection as sentimental weakness. It believes in the emotional value of reunion. That sincerity is increasingly rare in comedies built around absurdity. Home Alone is willing to be ridiculous and heartfelt at the same time. It does not apologize for either. John Williams' score is one of the film's most powerful secret weapons because it gives the story emotional scale. Without the music, many of Kevin's actions would remain funny but small. Williams makes them feel adventurous. Bells, orchestral textures, playful motifs, and sweeping melodies turn a suburban house into a cinematic landscape. The score captures childlike wonder without becoming childish. It can sound mischievous during Kevin's exploration of the empty house, suspenseful when danger approaches, and deeply emotional when the story turns toward family. This contrast allows the same physical location to carry different meanings. The kitchen can be a playground in one scene and a lonely room in another. The score tells us how to feel that change. Somewhere in My Memory is particularly important because it connects the film to the emotional idea of Christmas itself. Its melody carries nostalgia before the audience has even had time to consciously process what they are feeling. It sounds like memory. That is fitting because Home Alone is ultimately a movie about remembering what matters. The music does not simply accompany Kevin's experiences. It enlarges them. A child walking through a house becomes an adventure. A mother searching for her son becomes a desperate emotional journey. A quiet reunion becomes a Christmas memory. The score also knows when to step back. Silence around certain moments allows the environment to become audible. Footsteps, creaking floors, doors, locks, and distant sounds become part of the suspense. The absence of music can make a simple hallway feel dangerous. Then, when the orchestration returns, the emotional release becomes stronger. This is why the soundtrack became inseparable from the movie's holiday identity. The film does not merely show Christmas. It sounds like Christmas. Sound design completes the physical comedy. Ordinary objects become exaggerated through impact sounds that borrow from cartoon language. Footsteps become more noticeable. Floors creak at exactly the right moments. Doors slam with exaggerated authority. Locks click. Traps produce sharp, recognizable sounds. Harry and Marv's screams become comic punctuation. Their vocal performances are essential because the audience needs to feel the rhythm of each gag. The impact happens, the reaction follows, and the reaction tells us how to laugh. silence is equally important. Before a major impact, the soundtrack may temporarily narrow, allowing anticipation to build. The house itself becomes audible. That is especially effective because Kevin's environment is otherwise so full of Christmas noise. Music, conversation, television, appliances, and family chatter establish the house as a living space. When Kevin is alone, the soundscape changes. The absence of voices becomes noticeable. His own voice becomes an emotional anchor. Even when he is joking, talking to himself, or giving instructions, the audience hears the loneliness underneath. The Christmas songs surrounding the story reinforce the seasonal identity, but the sound design never allows the house to become merely decorative. It has texture. It has echoes. It has rooms with different acoustic identities. This helps the audience feel the physical space. We know where Kevin is because we understand how the house sounds. And because we understand the house, the traps become readable. Home Alone's audio design is therefore not simply about making things louder. It is about creating a world in which comedy and emotion occupy the same acoustic space. When Home Alone reached audiences in 1990, it had the advantage of being immediately understandable. You did not need complicated mythology, elaborate world building, or prior knowledge. A child is left alone. Burglars come. He defends himself. The simplicity was commercially powerful because the concept could be communicated instantly. But what audiences discovered was that the film offered much more than its premise suggested. Macaulay Culkin became an instant star because Kevin was not merely a cute child. He had a distinct personality. His expressions were memorable. His confidence was funny. His fear was believable. The screen became an iconic image because it condensed the movie's entire emotional vocabulary into one face: surprise, terror, comedy, and childhood vulnerability. Harry and Marv also entered pop culture vocabulary because their personalities were so recognizable. The Wet Bandits were not sophisticated villains, but their chemistry gave them longevity. The traps became instantly recognizable sequences that viewers could describe even years after seeing the movie. The fake gangster film became another cultural reference because it perfectly captured Kevin's ability to manipulate the adult world using images designed for adults. Home video and television reruns expanded the movie's reach beyond the original theatrical audience. It became something families could revisit every Christmas. That repeatability matters. A movie seen once is entertainment. A movie watched every year becomes tradition. Home Alone gradually moved from being a successful film to being part of the ritual of the season. Different generations encountered it at different ages. Children watched it for the traps. Teenagers watched it for the comedy. Parents watched it with a different awareness of the nightmare scenario. Adults who had grown up with it watched it for nostalgia. The movie was flexible enough to accommodate all of them. Its long-term influence is partly explained by how easy its central idea is to imitate. A child versus adults. A house transformed into a playground. Ordinary objects becoming weapons. A family comedy built around temporary separation. Hollywood repeatedly returned to versions of these concepts because the formula was so accessible. Yet many imitators struggled to reproduce the emotional balance. It is easy to copy traps. It is harder to copy Kevin's vulnerability. It is easy to create a funny villain. It is harder to create an emotional counterweight like Marley. It is easy to decorate a movie with Christmas imagery. It is harder to make Christmas function as a metaphor for returning home. That distinction helps explain why Home Alone remained culturally dominant while many similar films faded. The McAllister house itself became part of the film's identity. Its architecture is recognizable because viewers spent so much time learning its geography. The stairs, rooms, windows, exterior, and surrounding neighborhood became almost as familiar as the characters. The internet later transformed the movie's absurdities into endless discussion. Could Kevin realistically survive the traps? How negligent were his parents? How much would the burglars actually have survived? These questions are funny because the film's logic is so clearly exaggerated. But the continued debate also proves that people are still mentally inhabiting its world. They are still testing its rules. The movie has survived the transition from VHS to television to DVD to streaming because nostalgia is not simply passive memory. It is repeated participation. Every Christmas, people return to the same house, the same music, the same traps, and the same emotional conclusion. Critically, Home Alone occupies an interesting space because professional standards and audience affection do not always measure the same thing. Some critics recognize the film's craftsmanship, performances, visual energy, and music while also questioning its excessive violence and formulaic structure. Those criticisms are not unreasonable. If the movie is judged as a realistic family drama, enormous problems appear immediately. But audiences rarely approached it that way. They understood the film as fantasy comedy. The difference between realism and emotional truth is important. A paint would not realistically produce the kind of injury the movie depicts, but the scene communicates something emotionally true about Kevin's struggle to overcome people who believe they are stronger than him. The traps are exaggerated because the movie is expressing childhood power in exaggerated visual language. The same is true of the burglars' ability to survive punishment after punishment. Their bodies operate according to cartoon physics because their function is closer to comic antagonists than realistic criminals. Critics can legitimately argue that the violence becomes excessive. They can also praise the precision of the comedic timing, Culkin's performance, the production design, and Williams' score. These positions do not cancel each other out. A film can be technically sophisticated and logically absurd. It can be emotionally sincere and structurally formulaic. It can be both a great Christmas movie and a terrible guide to home security. That tension is part of what makes Home Alone interesting to revisit. The most obvious criticism is the negligence of Kevin's parents. How could an entire family leave for an international flight without realizing that one child was missing? The answer inside the story is a combination of chaos, confusion, assumptions, and human error. In real life, it would be an extraordinary failure. But the movie requires that failure because without it there is no story. The larger question is what happens after the mistake. Kate's panic is immediate and intense, which helps preserve the audience's sympathy for her. She is not portrayed as indifferent. She is horrified. The family's wealth also invites criticism. The McAllister home is large enough to support Kevin's fantasy, and the family appears financially comfortable enough to make the entire situation possible. Their resources make Kevin's adventure more extravagant. They also make the story feel like a suburban dream rather than an ordinary household crisis. The traps create another ethical problem. Kevin is defending himself, but he is also setting devices that could cause severe injury. The movie avoids dwelling on the morality because its comic universe has already established that Harry and Marv are dangerous criminals. Still, viewed realistically, Kevin's actions are extreme. That is precisely why the film works better as fantasy than as moral realism. Its purpose is not to teach children how to defend their homes. Its purpose is to turn a child's imagination of power into a cinematic spectacle. The burglars survive because the movie needs them to survive. Kevin's parents fail because the premise requires them to fail. The house behaves like a playground because childhood itself is being represented as a world where imagination can temporarily override adult reality. Commercially, Home Alone became something much larger than a straightforward family comedy. Its production budget was modest relative to the scale of its eventual success, and its theatrical run demonstrated an unusual level of endurance. The film did not behave like a movie that audiences watched once and forgot. Families returned. Word of mouth expanded its audience. The holiday setting gave it a recurring seasonal advantage. Macaulay Culkin's growing popularity also transformed Kevin from a character into a marketable cultural figure. John Hughes already carried commercial credibility, but Home Alone demonstrated how powerful a simple family premise could become when combined with a charismatic child performer and a strong visual identity. International audiences could understand the central story without needing detailed cultural knowledge. The house, the burglars, the traps, and the family separation are universal enough to travel. Home video then gave the movie a second life. A theatrical success can disappear when its release window closes. A Christmas movie can return every year. That seasonal repetition effectively gives Home Alone a renewable audience. The business value of that longevity is enormous because the film is not dependent on one moment of cultural attention. It can be rediscovered by every new generation. The franchise potential became obvious. A sequel could place Kevin in another large environment and repeat the basic formula while changing the location. That eventually happened, with Home Alone 2 moving the concept into New York City. Culkin's increasing star power made the continuation commercially attractive. Later sequels and television projects attempted to extend the brand, while other studios repeatedly explored child versus adult premises. But the original remained the standard against which those attempts were measured. This is a common pattern in Hollywood. Once a formula proves successful, the industry reproduces its surface features. Yet surface reproduction rarely guarantees the same emotional effect. Home Alone had a rare combination of child star charisma, writerly understanding of family conflict, visual design, music, and comic timing. The house itself was recognizable. The Christmas setting was immediately marketable. The traps were promotional gold. The characters were easy to remember. The concept was easy to pitch. But underneath all of that was a story about a child discovering that he needs people. That emotional architecture is harder to franchise than the physical premise. Historically, Home Alone occupies a unique position in American family entertainment because it fused several traditions at once. It belonged to the late 1980s and early 1990s wave of family comedies, carried John Hughes' understanding of youth culture, introduced Macaulay Culkin as one of the era's defining child stars, showcased Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern in an unusually physical comic mode, and gave John Williams another memorable piece of Christmas music. Chris Columbus demonstrated his ability to move between large-scale family spectacle and intimate emotion. The film's images became cultural shorthand. Kevin's scream. The house. The paint cans. The Christmas tree. The burglars. The church. The reunion. These images are recognizable even to people who have never watched the entire film. That is a mark of cinematic significance. The movie also influenced how studios thought about holiday entertainment. A Christmas movie did not have to be purely sentimental. It could be broad comedy, adventure, suspense, and family drama at the same time. That combination became part of its legacy. Yet not every part of Home Alone has aged equally. Some elements belong unmistakably to 1990. The logistics of international travel are different. Communication technology is different. The absence of smartphones is essential to the premise. Today, a child left alone in a large house would have access to communication tools that could completely transform the story. Kevin could potentially contact his parents instantly, use location services, access cameras, order supplies, or communicate with emergency services. The movie's tension depends partly on a world in which information moves slowly. A phone call matters. A police visit matters. A plane ticket matters. The physical distance between Chicago and Paris feels almost absolute. That technology gap is obvious now, but it also gives the movie historical charm. It captures a world before constant connectivity. The wealth and suburban fantasy are also products of their era. The McAllister house is an idealized vision of comfortable American life, and the movie treats its abundance as both magical and ordinary. Modern audiences may question the scale of that wealth more quickly than viewers did in 1990. But the emotional psychology remains almost untouched. Children still argue with parents. Siblings still irritate one another. Kids still fantasize about being independent. Parents still underestimate how intensely children experience family conflict. Christmas still carries memories of home. The technology may date the movie, but the emotional architecture does not. That is why Home Alone would be difficult to remake in exactly the same way today. The premise would require some explanation for why Kevin could not immediately contact his family or receive help. But perhaps the more important reason not to remake it is that the original captures a particular childhood experience that modern technology has changed. There was once a stronger sense of physical separation. If someone left town, they were genuinely far away. If you were alone in a house, you were actually alone. That isolation created space for imagination. Home Alone turns that space into a playground and a threat. Modern children may experience different forms of independence, but the emotional question remains. What happens when the people you depend on are suddenly unavailable? What do you do when you have to make decisions without reassurance? How do you discover your own capabilities without losing your connection to others? Those questions are timeless. Adults may laugh at the dated technology, but children still understand Kevin. And adults may interpret the story differently because they now see the parent's side. A child watches Kevin's freedom. A parent watches Kate's panic. A former child watching years later can see both at once. And that dual perspective leads to the most balanced way of judging the film. Home Alone is not flawless. Its plot depends on an extraordinary coincidence. Its violence is absurd. Its parents make an almost unbelievable mistake. Harry and Marv survive injuries that would be catastrophic in reality. Kevin's ability to prepare such elaborate traps is wildly improbable. Yet none of those weaknesses erase the film's strengths. Macaulay Culkin carries the story with an unusual mixture of confidence and vulnerability. Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern create a comic partnership that remains instantly recognizable. John Hughes gives the story emotional simplicity without making it emotionally empty. Chris Columbus understands the visual rhythm of family comedy. The production design creates a house that audiences remember decades later. John Williams gives the film a musical identity that transcends the plot. And the practical comedy remains tactile in an era increasingly dominated by digital effects. You can feel the physicality of the traps. You understand where objects are located. You anticipate impacts. The movie gives comedy weight. Its weaknesses are real, but they belong to a film that was never attempting realism in the first place. If anything, its willingness to embrace exaggeration is part of its identity. Home Alone works because it understands that a child's imagination does not operate according to adult probability. In that sense, the movie deserves to be judged less as a realistic account of child abandonment and more as a cinematic fantasy about what childhood independence feels like. And that brings us back to the strange contradiction at the center of Kevin's story. At the beginning, he wants everyone gone. He believes his family is the problem. He wants peace. He wants control. He wants the ability to make decisions without anyone telling him what to do. And then he gets it. Completely. The world gives him exactly what he asks for. But independence without connection turns out to be much less satisfying than he imagined. The house is still there. The food is still there. The television is still there. The Christmas decorations are still glowing. The bed is still available. The freedom is still technically his. But something is missing. The people are missing. The voices are missing. The arguments are missing. Even the annoying things begin to feel valuable because they are evidence that other people exist in his life. That is the lesson old man Marley embodies. Marley has experienced a deeper version of what Kevin is beginning to understand. Isolation can become a habit. Distance can become permanent. A person can convince themselves that separation is easier than reconciliation until the opportunity for reconciliation becomes harder to reach. Kevin gets a temporary glimpse of that possibility and chooses differently. The house therefore changes meaning across the film. At first, it is the place where Kevin feels powerless. Then it becomes the place where he experiences freedom. Then it becomes a fortress. Then it becomes a battlefield. Finally, it becomes home again. That final transformation is more important than any trap. Home is not simply the building Kevin protects. Home is the place where his relationships have meaning. The physical structure matters because it contains memories, but the emotional meaning comes from the people associated with it. That is why the final reunion works. Kevin is not returning to the same house in the same emotional state. He is returning with a different understanding of what the house represents. He has learned that growing up does not mean needing people less. It means understanding why you need them, while also learning what you can do for yourself. Independence is not the absence of connection. It is the ability to stand on your own without believing that standing alone is the ultimate goal. Maybe that is why audiences return to Home Alone every Christmas. Not because the traps are still surprising. They are not. Not because we genuinely believe Kevin could survive everything Harry and Marv endure. We obviously do not. We return because the movie preserves a feeling that is difficult to recreate once childhood is gone. The feeling that home is both a place you desperately want to escape and the place you desperately want to return to. The feeling that family can drive you crazy and still be the thing you miss most when it disappears. The feeling that fear can reveal abilities you did not know you possessed. The feeling that Christmas is not really about the decorations, the presents, or even the perfect family gathering. It is about the emotional meaning we attach to coming back together. So perhaps Kevin is a hero. Perhaps he is a menace. Realistically, he is both. He is a child who reacts badly to frustration, gets an extraordinary opportunity to experience independence, and then uses that independence to protect himself. He is imaginative, brave, selfish, frightened, compassionate, reckless, and loving. That combination is exactly why he feels real even inside an impossible story. Harry and Marv may be the villains, but Kevin's true opponent is the belief that being alone would solve everything. The traps defeat the burglars. The experience defeats that belief. And when the front door finally opens and Kevin sees his family again, the greatest victory is not that he survived Christmas without them. It is that he finally understands why surviving without them was never what he wanted. That is what Home Alone has been telling us for all these years, beneath the screams, the snow, the Christmas lights, the impossible injuries, and the laughter. Growing up means learning that freedom matters, but connection matters too. It means discovering that the people who frustrate you can also be the people who make a place feel like home. It means learning responsibility without confusing responsibility with isolation. Kevin spends one extraordinary Christmas proving that he can take care of himself. Then, when the people he loves return, he discovers something even more important. Taking care of yourself does not mean refusing to need anyone. Sometimes the strongest thing a child can learn is not how to live alone, but why coming home still feels better. And maybe that is why, every Christmas, decades after Kevin first screamed in front of that mirror, we still come back to the McAllister house. Because somewhere inside that ridiculous fantasy is a memory most of us recognize, the childhood belief that home was a place we could run away from, followed by the adult realization that home was the place we were always hoping to return to. And if you have a favorite Home Alone moment, whether it is Kevin's first night of freedom, the wet bandits discovering the traps, the church conversation with Marley, the final reunion, or simply that unforgettable scream, ask yourself what you remember most clearly. Is it the joke? The fear? The music? The house? Or the feeling of being young enough to believe that the entire world could disappear overnight, only to discover that what you missed most was the sound of the people you once wanted gone? Because in the end, Home Alone is not really about a boy who learns how to live without his family. It is about a boy who finally understands what makes a house a home.